and it is my very great pleasure to welcome you to this session on changing the rules, how regulation can enable progress. So in this session, we will unpack the recent regulatory developments, whether recently adopted or still under negotiation, and they could significantly reshape how AMR solutions are developed and ultimately brought to market. We have three fantastic speakers, two of which are in the room, and the last speaker, Jesus, will be remote. So we have Dr. Radu Botros from the European Medicines Agency, who will discuss the evolving regulatory environment, including the technical concept of regulatory sandboxes and their potential role in supporting innovation. We have Mihai Rotaro from FPA, the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, and he will share early lessons from the implementation of the joint clinical assessment, what is changing on the ground, and what companies should anticipate now. And then remotely, we have Jesus Rodriguez from MedTech Europe, who will focus on the much debated IVD regulation, where a targeted revision has just begun. Is a proposal meeting the sector's expectations? So first up, I would like to invite Radu to the stage. So Dr. Radu Botros is an infectious disease specialist that holds the position of Senior Scientific Officer in the Department of Public Health Threats at the European Medicines Agency. He worked as an infectious disease clinician for 10 years before joining the agency in 2009 as a scientific administrator in the pediatric team. From there, he moved to the anti-infectives and vaccines team, where he worked with the efficacy and safety-related pre- and post-authorization aspects of centralized marketing authorization applications. Since March 2020, he is a member of the health threats team. His main interests are with antibacterial, antifungal, and antiviral medicines, and with AMR. He is a member of the EMA Emergency Task Force. Thank you, Red.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the organizer for inviting me here. I think it's the 5th or the 6th time in a row. So I think I know some of you in the meantime quite well, and I'm very happy to talk about a few aspects that will be coming up in the immediate future. And I'm talking about things that have been, I don't know how the slides should progress with next, but for some reason they don't.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk about some aspects that are coming out of the new pharma legislation. You know that in the European Union, we have a package that has been developed by the European Commission, and back in December of 2025, so I think it was the 18th of December, if my memory serves, there has been agreement, in principle with the Council on the text. The final text is not yet published, but the principles have been agreed upon. And I think, I need to say from the very beginning the fact that talking about this is more about how we as regulators will probably be dealing with the notions, with the articles from the new pharma legislation. Obviously, since we are not the legislators, we have not created the law, there is always this small disclaimer that, we will need first to see the final text being published and adopted, and, we'll take it from there. That said, here is one of the important bits of the legislation. I don't know why these things are moving without me pressing anything, but I will probably get to understand why. In any case, so one of the important bits is how the regulators in Europe, and I need to stress this is a European legislation and it's a European package. This is how it has been conceived. And we may discuss how to harmonize this with other jurisdictions if possible. But in the European law, the legislator, the European Commission, has brought this forward because we realize that there are products, innovative products, that do not fit the existing legislation in terms of approving medicinal products. And so the question was what to do about it. You know that, for instance, and this all, I suppose, has been started with the AI revolution. You see that AI that we all now know about is moving quite fast, still very fast actually, in various domains, but it also starts to be seen in the pharma field. And so, you know, it was clear to us and to the Commission the fact that we need somehow to, you know, to design something that could help us regulate these products. One of the bit that has been already recognized, you know, there are two articles, important articles about AMR in the new pharma legislation. One of them is this Article 28, and there is an annex to the directive which is called Annex 7, in which essentially you will have those products that will benefit from this new framework. And one of them is already, that's actually the only one that is mentioned, is bacteriophages. So, you know, we know already since inception that bacteriophages, in particular those for personalized treatment, do not fit the current framework simply because there is a need to vary the composition. So with that in mind, the Commission has put together in the legislation a proposal of having a sandbox, a regulatory sandbox. What is this? It's a controlled environment in which you test the innovation and you see how you best can regulate the product. Now, of course, this is not to say that this sandbox is, you know, we will create thousands of sandboxes based on, you know, the fact that we think, oh, the regulation, the legislation is imperfect here and there. Here, of course, we will need to have a bit of a restricted view, in the sense that we will only look at innovative products, again, innovative products that we know, that we understand are difficult or impossible to regulate with the current situation. And it will be a proposal that will be made on, you know, the European Medicines Agency is a decentralized agency of the European Union, where a technical body that, of course, looks into the technical part of these aspects. And so we will, of course, be informing and advising the Commission as to, you know, where we believe that there is room for creating these sandboxes. And of course, based on a recommendation and on these views, there will be a temporary creation of a sandbox in which indeed we will, in a controlled environment, try to see, you know, how the legislation could be adapted. It's like a pilot, if you want. And with the lessons learned from this temporary construct, eventually the Commission will go and produce a legislative output. Will include the new product in this Annex 7, which is the list of all the products that benefit from an adaptive framework. And the adaptive framework, of course, will need to be clearly stated, you know, what it exactly means for that particular product. As I said, phages are at the moment the one and only type of product that are listed in this Annex 7, simply because we already know that they don't fit the personalized ones in the current legislation. So I think the important message here is the fact that the sandbox is temporary, that it's about real-world testing, and that this testing is being supervised by the regulator. And also, the purpose is to gather the evidence on how to regulate this particular type of product that benefits from such a sandbox. This is the source in the law, it's these articles. And of course, the output, the legislative output, which is the adapted framework, will be a permanent, will be a binding legislation for that particular type of product. There will be specific rules, and obviously the scope here is to have a regulatory environment that actually fits the the situation in which you cannot really regulate with the current situation. So here is a bit of a graph explaining what I just said. So you have an innovation, you don't know how to regulate it, and of course you go into this sandbox environment, you feed in the learnings to the Commission, and then the Commission is adding the product into this Annex 7. Let's talk a little bit about phages. I have already alluded to a couple of things here. In the past, the previous regulation was, of course, mandating the regulatory to approve based on a fixed composition of the medicinal product. And, there were requirements for consistency of batches, and then you had to have the RCTs that some were conducted against placebo, some against an active comparator, depending on the product. Here, in the situation of phages, as I said, it's not only the variable composition, but also the fact that these are live organisms. These are, as you know, viruses of bacteria. So it's a live product, and it very much depends on its substrate. Because of course, if you don't have the substrate, the virus is dying, and the product simply does not have any efficacy at all. And the other point is the personalized aspect. The bacteriophage is like a key to a lock, if you wish. So it's specific to the strain that is present in the patient to be treated. If you give another phage that is active against the same species, but not against the strain that is in the patient, it may not work. That's why it's very important to select the right phage. Phages also, to make things more complex, they get resistance in time. So, you will need, once you find out that there is resistance, and by the way, for that you will need to have a standardized susceptibility testing method, because otherwise you wouldn't know probably neither to select the right phage nor to change it when needed. But when this is happening, of course, you need to change in beat 1, 2, or I don't know, the composition. You may want to treat the patient with one phage, with a couple of phages, with 3, 4, depending, on the situation. And if one of the strains or more of the strains get resistant, of course, you need to change it fast, ideally. So you see that this is the reality of phages, and this is why the Commission already said for this kind of products we don't need the sandbox probably, because we know already a lot about phages. So this is probably why they included it already into this Annex 7. So it's one of the things that is in the making, and how it would look like, of course, without entering into details. Of course, one of the important bits, and we heard yesterday from our colleague from the Estonian agency that there is now out a guideline of the EMA on the quality of cocktails, of preformed cocktails, and what are the requirements. Here, of course, that one, as I think my colleague explained, does exclude the personalized aspects, but also there we know that, something like the magistral formula, which is used in a couple of European countries, I think the most prominent being Belgium, and which is a prerogative of each and every member state, because it's about compassionate use of patient in need, and this is something that, of course, has value and is part of the law. What's important for us as European regulators, I think, is to, at some point, understand how these products work. The proof of efficacy has, until now, never been offered in a randomized clinical trial, because the few big ones that have been conducted have failed because of a number of reasons, and the very last notable one is the Fagoburn trial, where one of the reasons was the stability of the product, so you can understand that quality is a very important piece in this equation. And, while for compassionate use, we do hospital-based manufacturing, which is, by the way, not GMP compliant. And sorry to say, but I assume we hope for the best, isn't it? For a broader, if this product is working, it's probably also an ethical dilemma, if nothing else. We need to use it in the patients that can make use of them and, where they can be efficient. So, it cannot just give it in a very limited fashion to a few patients. For that, however, we need proof of efficacy to start with. And I think this is where, this framework will be looking into a number of things, because we know that for personalized treatment, this framework of clinical trials, big size and all these things doesn't really apply. We will have to look in the quality bit, and I think here we will need to discuss the as I told you, because of those reasons, I think GMP is the starting point. So we have to have a GMP facility that manufactures this, and we will need to see, where, in how far, and I don't want to speculate on this, at the hospital level, if anything can be done there, that I won't be able to tell you at the moment. But at the same time, looking at the non-clinical, there are some studies that are generally asked by regulators in developing a new medicinal product. And I'm talking here about toxicity, safety studies that need to be conducted. And I think here we will be possibly more lenient into, waiving some of the requirements. Until very recently, the phages have been generally recognized as being very safe. I think there's been recently a study that had an issue of safety, and I won't be dwelling into that, but just to tell you, of course, it's in a specific indication, so I don't know the details as to what exactly the problem was there, but, it's if once we will get to the bottom of it, we will see whether this has any implication in that sense. And of course, once you have we call them PTMPs, as you heard yesterday, so phage-containing therapeutic medicinal products, we will have to have a surveillance and feedback. So the whole point is that we are trying to be forthcoming. We want these products on the market in the view of this looming crisis of AMR. But of course, we will need to be reassured that they do work, that they are manufactured in a way that is reassuring in the sense that, again, it does not have, just to give one example, stability issues that may render the product ineffective. So essentially, one of the ways, and this is what the quality guidance that was presented yesterday is addressing, is the fixed cocktails for a broad indication. Here, our current view, and this has already, I think, been mentioned a number of times in the past, that we will need slight modification to what the previous legislation was saying about how marketing authorization can be granted, because it fits, so to say, this kind of model. On the contrary, as I said, for personalized treatments, we will need this adapted framework, and we will have to see, to work together to construct it, and to have these products in a fashion that allows the regulator to understand better how the fact that they work. That's the main problem, so to say, and I don't want to dwell on this particular term problem, because, problem sounds very negative, but it's an issue with compassionate use, the fact that you actually give it to a patient with the best of faith and hoping that it works, but you don't really have any way to gather this experience and, make it useful for a regulatory purpose, because obviously there are so many confounding factors. Even if that particular patient gets well, you don't know what led to that, because there are also negative situations, and actually, I've been, I think, at the conference 1 or 2 years ago where actually the negative cases, which many times they don't get published apparently, there were around 2/3 of the cases being treated. So I think this shows that it's very important also to understand what the population is that would benefit from this particular treatment. There could be also other products, and I mentioned already AI, that could make it into these adapted frameworks. Of course, most of them will be personalized medicines, but also all what has to do with the digital health and this new AI, new AI developments, and we will have ourselves, to learn how to deal with them for a regulatory purpose. Because of course we already are seeing in submissions different ways of using AI, and what we need to understand is how explainable it is, how reproducible it is. In other words, it shouldn't be a black box. That many of those models, and again, this is a topic per se, I suppose, but many of those models, they are probabilistic models. So, if you use, for instance, ChatGPT and ask a question, you get an answer, right? But if you do it again, you will get a different answer. The reason is because it uses probability to predict that. It's called a large language model, and it predicts the next word, and it builds a text which, sometimes can be very useful, but it's not the same text. So, you understand how this could be of a problem for a regulator. And I'm not talking only ChatGPT here. There are models that, look into the PK/PD of an antibiotic and so on. So we really need to understand what these models are doing. And, as you all know, this scene is moving so fast that, we really need to catch up just to know where we are. So quite interesting times. And before coming to an end with this initiative, I have been asked by organizers to mention another legislative initiative of the Commission. This one is not yet agreed, I have to stress it. It's about the new Biotech Act and how this can impact the clinical trial spectrum. You see here some data which are public, and the source is listed there, is an FPI report. The fact that the situation is that the multinational trials in the European Union have significantly dropped from 22 to 20%, and I think it was between 2012 and 2022 or something like that. So, in 1 decade, it's quite a lot. In the same time frame, the Chinese, the use of the conduct of these trials in China rose from 5% to 18%. So this is something that causes a bit of concern for us. There are also some issues with regard to how fast the authorization or how slow the authorizations of new medicinal products vary in different jurisdictions. And you see here that we were lagging behind in Europe to other agencies. But of course, this is not to be seen as an outright and very negative thing, simply because there are some of the reasons for that can be explained by a number of things. But I think the whole point is to change this pace as much as possible, to become a bit faster in assessing and in approving, to have the drugs available to the patients in need. There was, I think, one of the root causes that this particular report has identified is the ethics review part, which, as you know, each and every member state is reviewing and commenting upon and asking making additional requests, which of course can complicate the matters. And here, I think one of the things that would be looked into will be also this part. There will be some timeline compressions. As I said, we are aiming at having the total end-to-end timeline at the level of a member state dropping, for the clinical trial applications, I mean. And of course, there is a proposal to make this simultaneous submission of the protocol, of the sites, of the manufacturing changes, which we hope will translate into everything going smoother and faster. And there are, of course, also other aspects. As I said, this is a proposal. It's not yet agreed upon. So, I think it would be useless to dwell on numbers and other details. But I think my message to you is watch the space, because there will be definitely changes in the clinical trial world, probably to the better. But I think for you as developers, it's important to be aware. The other thing that the Commission has put forward in this is the fact that they would like this mutual recognition that, the member states should rely on the reference member state assessment. So, also this one is probably, if agreed, something that could drive things forward. There are some provisions on the GDPR and compliance to that upfront, but also on harmonization of templates, these kind of clerical things that sometimes very much complicate matters. So all in all, I think we come back to where we started, the fact that, we will have sandboxes in place. We are hoping that trials, and here you see the legislative biotech acts looks at a different range of situations, that all of this, once they will come into force, we will improve the field, and hopefully, we will have tackled partly the situation that I presented that, needs improvement for sure. With that, I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Radu. We're going to have a joint Q&A at the end, so if you've sure got loads of questions for Radu, and he's always around for questions, but we will, as there is a lot of overlap between our speakers' topics, we thought it'd just be easier to do a joint Q&A at the end. So our next speaker is Mihai Rotaro. He works as Director Market Access at FPIA, which is the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, where he is currently responsible for overall industry engagement in the implementation of the HTA regulation at EU level. He includes support FPA members' involvement in the system of joint clinical assessment, and in addition, Mihai is also responsible for oncology policy, advocating for policies to substantially increase access to innovative treatments in oncology for patients in Europe. Lastly, Mihai is involved in other market access related topics, such as combination product pricing, biotherapeutics policies, and various supply chain issues. Thank you, Mihai.
Thank you very much, Kerry. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me with you today. So I think what I wanted to do for the next, hopefully less than 10 minutes, I wanted to change a little bit tack, if you will, and try to discuss a bit more the market access side of the development and treatment pathway. So specifically, as Kerry did the introduction, the upcoming or the existing system of joint clinical assessment to be done at European level. So what we know, and obviously you will know as well, maybe better than me, but we see it obviously across treatments, across treatment types. We see that there's a great deal of variation between member states when it comes to acceptability of evidence for decision making, for pricing and reimbursement. So we're talking here about different approaches to trial data, to indirect treatment comparisons, of course, acceptability of real-world evidence, safety data, quality of life, economic, and so on and so forth. So as you know, we are really truly dealing with 27 different countries. So, and Where does this fit in terms of the pathway? So what we have today, or better yet, for some products, what we had yesterday is obviously you have a central marketing authorization done on the basis of an EMA regulatory evaluation, and then you have 27 different national HTAs and access decisions. Where there was, we have a experience of the last 20 years or so in terms of for project-based. There is a strong argument to be made that at least part of that HTA assessment can be done and should be done only once and it will be done based on the HTA regulation at European level. So we're really talking about the clinical assessment of the full HTA because, and in theory and in practice, there really shouldn't be any clinical difference in terms of the outcomes of a treatment for a patient in Belgium versus Romania versus Italy and so on and so forth. What does remain, however, national is whatever comes afterwards. So in terms of the ethics, the legal implications, and of course the economics and the pricing and reimbursement process. But there is ample scope to do the clinical assessment part once at European level. So this is what we have, well, we talk about today and tomorrow, and I'll come to that in a second, because the HTA regulation currently only applies to oncology medicines and ATMPs. In 2028, the scope will be expanded to orphan medicinal products, and then as of 2030 to all centrally approved products. So what are some of the key elements is we're talking about two parallel assessment processes. There's also the idea or the vision to have this done at an earlier stage. So the process starts at the same time based on the company submission to EMA. There's the parallel regulatory assessment and the joint clinical assessment, with the idea of having a joint clinical assessment report very close to the marketing authorization timeline so that all subsequent national procedures can start earlier and in theory also finish earlier. Just a couple of details on what are the key pillars and how do they fit on the timeline of the HTA regulations. So the most important part is what you see here on the right is the joint clinical assessment. So that is really the mandatory part of the regulation, and that is the main output of the system. It's a clinical assessment report, and it is supposed to evaluate the evidence and the robustness of the evidence for use at national level. The HTA regulation also foresees an important step for joint scientific consultations, and I'll come to that in a second as well, because it does offer the space for companies to ask for scientific advice together with EMA and HTA bodies, so that for a company you can better align and prepare your evidence generation plan for both the regulatory and access decisions in Europe. There's a voluntary pillar of horizon scanning, and then obviously all of this is also underpinned by joint methodologies, because I'll bring you back to the first slide. Not only is the acceptability of evidence very different at national level, it also varies depending on the methodology that is being applied in a certain HTA process. Just a couple of statistics, if you will, after 1 year. So the regulation became a reality on the 13th of January 2025. As I said, applies to oncology and ATMPs. There are 14 products currently in the process, and I should mention that this slide is maybe 2 weeks old, because at the recent CHMP meeting last week, yes, we have had the third product here on the list from Pfizer has been withdrawn by the marketing by the MAH due to a desire to improve its evidence base, and therefore it will no longer be part of the JCA process. However, the second product on the list from Ipsen has received a positive opinion from CHMP, which means that it will be the first to receive a JCA report in roughly maybe 8 to 10 weeks. That is the current estimate. And you'll see here, yeah, obviously this is interesting for the HTA crowd. The spread of companies, their geographical location, whether or not they're oncology or ATMPs. And also you see here a large number or variety of HTA bodies that are going to do the assessments. And I should have mentioned this earlier. It's not a European agency. It's not a process similar to the EMA. It is a collaborative member state-led process. So the JCA, the Joint Clinical Assessment, is done by an assessor and a co-assessor, so by 2 member states on behalf of the rest of 25. And the idea is that this way you will have some sort of specialization and some sort of efficiency gains, because the same clinical assessment of evidence will only be done once, and it will be done by the assessors, and then the rest of the 25 countries, can take the outputs and the outcomes as is. Now, what do we see 1 year in? It's a new process. I think I have heard in other conferences the JCA being referred to as a baby. So it's 1 year old. It's only now starting to learn how to walk, and obviously there are bumps in the road, just to call them that. We're still testing, if you will, some of the procedures, templates, deadlines, and so on. The evidence burden seems to be quite significant, at least for the oncology products in scope right now. It is at the moment a bigger burden than what we were expecting, mainly because our perception is that the member states are still guarding very jealously their own needs. So rather than having 27 countries come together and align and streamline on needs, we seem to have a situation today, and it hopefully will get better, where you have 27 different member states just adding their respective requirements on top of each other. So yeah, we have yet to see the streamline, the efficiency gains, and at the end of the day, the proof will be in the pudding, because where we expect to have advantages is that once a JCA report is finalized, then it will be used and not duplicated at national level. And I'll finish with this in terms of what can you do. Obviously, this is probably new to a lot of the people in the room, but also obviously for AMR developers, because 4 years is really not a long time. I've been working on the HTA regulation for 7 or 8 years now. It really does pass on like a blink of an eye. So start preparing now. I think one of the other key learnings that we have noted from our FPM members in oncology is that it is very, very important, and it should be done as early as possible, is this alignment across the company between the evidence development, the regulatory, and the market access colleagues in terms of strategy and thinking. You can already start doing your own mapping in terms of what are the requirements at national level. Obviously, at the beginning, it will require a little bit more resources. I definitely very much recommend applying for joint scientific consultations. This is voluntary, as I mentioned, this is voluntary, and it will provide you the very first opportunity to see how the thinking between the EMA and the HTA bodies either is aligned or is not, or if you will, what are some of the additional requirements from HTA bodies, because at the end of the day, and we should not forget this, they do answer different questions and they do have different needs. So obviously on the EMA side, we're talking about quality, safety, and efficacy. But on the HTA side, we are talking about relative effectiveness. We are talking about whether or not the medicine, the treatment in question is better or not compared to existing timeline. And yeah, see for yourself, the JCA reports and the submission dossier will be made public. So this should happen for the Ipsen product in, like I said, probably mid-May. I'm very excited to read what's in it. It's going to be a long time coming. And then we will see how the outputs are used for decision-making at national level. And I'll leave you with this and hand back over to Kerry, and happy to have your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihai. Our last speaker, who I hope is online, is Jesus Rueda Rodriguez. He is the Director General of Strategies, Special Projects and International Affairs at MedTech Europe, where he has worked since 2011. Is he there?
Hello, Carrie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Jesus. I'll leave you to it.
Thank you so much, Carrie, and thank you for the introduction. And hello, everyone from Brussels. First of all, my apologies for not being able to be there with you. I see that you can see my slides, so perfect. We'll get on with it. So I'm going to be giving a bit of an overview of what we have been seeing in the upcoming modifications that have been proposed by the Commission to the regulatory framework for medical devices and in vitro diagnostics, so the MDR and IVDR. Okay, so just to highlight something that you would already know, but to set the scene, when it comes to AMR discussions, in vitro diagnostics and medical devices play different roles. So within the in vitro diagnostic space, it is unsurprisingly the place where we are trying to determine first if a patient is actually infected or if there's some other condition that is causing their symptoms. Once we assess that the infection is correct, we can help to identify the pathogen and then very critically characterize the resistance profile of the pathogen insofar as that is possible. And it is an area where new ideas, new technologies, new ways of doing this in order to do it as fast as possible are constantly being deployed and developed. And in particular, there's an awful lot of interest in getting these identification process going as fast as possible in cases of things like sepsis, where time is of the essence in order to identify what is happening to a patient and to enable a rapid solutions for those concerned. In the area of medical devices, it's interesting because it's a little bit more complex. And the key technologies that we have right now focus on minimizing infections in hospitals and in different operating theaters in particular. And so for infection prevention and control, there are a number of key technologies that are available to minimize the risk of infection. This spreads all the way through from protective equipment through to the actual surgery equipment that is used on certain patients and the way that this is applied. It's also used well beyond the surgical theater. It's also used across the hospitals to do all sorts of things from simple disinfecting of surfaces all the way through to patient management and patient treatment. One other area that's quite interesting, and I'll get back to, is most of the software solutions, whether they are AI-based or not, which are relevant for the deployment of AMR solutions, try to counter resistance in various pathogens, are actually formally either an in vitro diagnostic or a medical device. So these legislations also cover those sort of situations. Now, the current regulatory situation is that we had regulations that were published back in 2017, and we have been working to try to implement them since then. Implementation has been pushed back on several occasions in several ways, and it was finally recognized that there was a need to revise certain aspects of this legislation in order to be able to fully deploy and implement it properly. And so the Commission proposed last December a text, surprisingly long text, in order to make numerous amendments to the legislation so as to ensure that it would be possible to enforce it and apply it across the Union in a cohesive way. Currently, the text is going through co-decision, so all that I'm going to say from now on could be subject to change. Those of you that are familiar with the EU legislative system will understand that until Parliament and Council have had their say, whatever the Commission has put on the table is a temporary reference point that we're operating under. However, the main thrust of what the Commission is proposing is something that's generally accepted as necessary by most stakeholders. So we expect that if not exactly what I'm going to present now, then something similar or equivalent is likely to end up in the final text. But that's a little bit of conjecture on my part and perhaps optimism showing through. So bear that in mind as I explain what we have on the table today for discussion. Now, there are some key changes that apply across the board. One of the things that's interesting is that unlike in other jurisdictions or in other sectors, the medtech regulations did not allow for a specific regulatory pathway for breakthrough innovations where there was a clinical need that was identified but generating large amounts of evidence for that clinical need was difficult or particularly challenging for any one of a number of enumerated reasons. In order to address that, the Commission has proposed a new pathway for breakthrough and orphan devices that would allow faster market access under controlled conditions. Well, devices are always controlled, but additional controls in order to make sure that these innovations don't linger in the sidelines for too long, as they're often needed to be deployed. And it's true that specifically in the AMR space, it is likely that this is something that will happen in some instances. It's that we foresee this happening for some technologies. I thought it was really useful to have the extensive presentation of sandboxes. Sandboxes indeed is one of the things that the Commission is also included into the proposals for the medical device regulations and IVD regulations. And we are learning a lot from the pharma space on how this is playing out. And as was pointed out, this is something that will be used cautiously and where necessary and justified. Interestingly, having had some initial discussions with the regulators in the medical device space, one of the places where they see sandboxes potentially having real value is for certain technologies that would really help to counter the AMR issue. So it is a space that will likely be useful and used for our regulations. And then there's a whole level of administrative burden that's being reduced. That sounds like something high level and not particularly specifically relevant for AMR. And to some extent, that's true. But it's also true that one of the paradoxes for those of you working in the AMR space that'll understand is that often we are developing solutions and technologies that might not have a huge breadth of application. So that means that overall interest in the market is sometimes greater and sometimes lesser. So reducing the barrier to entry by reducing the administrative burden can really help some of those technologies for relatively rare diagnostic systems and so on to be able to enter the market more efficiently. So we do believe it's really going to help. And it's good to see that the Commission has taken this on board and is working diligently to try to ensure these technologies become available. Specifically for in vitro diagnostics, there's a few interesting things that are changing. Some of these are more of legal change to adapt the reality of the law to the reality of what we do in practice, but nevertheless, they are worth highlighting. First of all, the proposed regulations actually reinforce quite considerably the coordination between notified bodies and medical device authorities on the one hand, and the European Medicines Agency on the other. And this can become very important in the AMR space, especially when we're talking about diagnostic technologies that are going to be used to, for example, determine the kind of antibiotics that could be used, the kind of antibiotics that should not be used, kind of treatments that would be available. There was a long discussion about phage therapy. That's a very interesting one, and that's one of those situations where we're probably going to be having targeted therapy for which extensive testing will be done on the patients also ahead of time. All of those situations are, in many cases, not always and not without fail, going to require coordination with the medicines agencies. We're also seeing a much more broad use of scientific opinions at various stages during the regulatory process, which will help these technologies get through in a timely fashion and avoid extensive discussions on process and procedures and being able to, on protocols and these kinds of issues that have popped up in the past, and being able to really focus on, when you're looking at the regulatory approval, on the actual data and the evidence that backs up a given product. There's also some discussion of in-house assays. That's a term you might not all be familiar with, but it's actually the way in which individual labs, reference labs, clinical labs, are able to deploy and develop their own testing systems That is something that the Commission has also wanted to expand. It's one of those areas that's a little bit up for discussion because the Commission proposal might have some unintended consequences. So we expect that the legislators will take a deeper dive into that particular aspect of the Commission proposal. But nevertheless, there is no doubt that in-house assays and the development of technologies, also in the clinical space, is something that will be important for combating AMR in the longer term. So, one other interesting thing is that the new regulations are actually going to be integrating the regulatory pathways for AI systems that are medical devices and the medical device regulations and IVD regulations. I bring this up because AI is likely to have a very special role when it comes to AMR compliance. I'm not going to belabor that point. I'm sure that other speakers have covered it over the course of the conference. But this does mean there's going to be a single pathway of entry for new AMR solutions that are AI-based. And the majority of those solutions are actually going to be falling under the IVDR and MDR's regulatory framework. So this is something that we do believe is potentially very, very useful. We will see exactly how it plays out. There's still some questions about the practicalities of this, but those are mostly implementation questions rather than legislative questions. The Commission's legislative proposal is interesting. It might get tweaked like everything else, but the message that's being sent as a one-stop shop for approval of AI-based technologies in the medical space is very important. And finally, this is actually something that is partially linked to the new MDR and IVDR, but also linked to the European Health Data Space and other healthcare initiatives. Because as we all know, data generation, monitoring of potential outbreaks and the spreading of resistant organisms is really crucial. And one of the things that happens is that with the generation of a European health data space, that data generation, there is a potential to actually integrate directly from the generation of diagnostic results into the EHDS to create an even faster system for both monitoring the epidemiology of these different pathogens and also managing them at a patient level. So we are looking very avidly at how the linking of diagnostic systems to the European Health Data Space is going to be functioning. It is one of the aspects of the broader regulatory space that we operate in that we believe is likely to have a significant impact on our ability to develop and to deploy better solutions and care in the AMR space. And so with that, without further ado, I think that I want to thank you all for your patience, and I pass it back to Kerry. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jesus. If you could stay on the line, brilliant. There you are. If I could invite Mihai and Radu up to take questions from the audience. I invite the audience to ask any questions that they would like of our very knowledgeable speakers. If you can use the microphones, I've been asked to instruct you towards the microphones. That would be brilliant. Thank you.
Hi. Hello? Oh, good, you can hear me, thanks. Hi, thank you for these talks this morning. My name's Rachel Freeman. I lead on AMR at IQVIA. I have a question for you, Mihai. Just firstly to say, I think the move towards the JCA is really positive. That alignment, that harmonisation, I think is fantastic. And I might have missed this. When did you say this is going to be extended to anti-infectives? Because I know it's currently focused on orphan drugs and oncology.
2030. So as of 2030, all centrally approved products will be in scope.
Okay, great.
12th of January 2030, to be more precise.
Very, very specific. Okay. Any chance that that could be moved forward? And the reason I say this is because particularly with oncology drugs that rely on effective antibiotics, you've effectively got a 4-year delay between some of your oncology drugs that rely on effective, potentially novel antibiotics. Is there any way of justifying bringing that date forward?
I mean, it's one of those situations where you can never say never, but it's. I don't think there's very, very little political appetite to do this. The regulation does foresee a sort of an emergency clause, if you will, where member states could agree to include in scope of the JCA medicines of high potential impact, but this is more of a, I think this is, for those of you who know, this is more of a reaction to the Sovaldi case a couple of years ago. So it's just for member states to have the possibility to include products that have, let's say, a high, let me put it, healthcare system impact. So
All right, that's good to know.
I would say no, but there's always a lingering possibility, but I personally don't really see it.
Thank you. I like the lingering possibility.
Thank you. Oh, we have a question over here.
John Rex, is this microphone on? Maybe now it is. First, change takes a long time, Rachel. That's the tricky thing, right? But glad to see it moving forward. So, Radu, when you guys were talking about sandbox choices, did you spend any time thinking about whether or not agents for, I'm going to use the words, rare microbes might fit? And I was looking at your N of 1 in cancer where you said it's impossible to do a randomized one. Is there a case to be made for a version of this where it's almost impossible to do?
Thanks, John. I mean, for sure. I mean, including in the space of phages. Speaking about phages, N of 1 is one of the options, and adaptive is also the other things that we need to think about. So while I think that for the moment, this process about the what can and should be done in this framework is just starting, I think there is scope into looking into these things for sure. And, we will see, whether it indeed qualifies for rare. For rare pathogens, as you know, there are still in the guidelines that we have at the EMA, it's not for personalized, of course, it's not for N of 1 type of trials, but, for rare diseases like, rare fungal infections and so on, there are approval pathways already available, but indeed this would not cover all these really, really rare situations, and we are willing to look into that.
Yeah, so thanks for working on it. It's going to make a big difference, and well begun is half done, so thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we have a question here.
Thank you. I listened to all that with great interest. There's no question that there's a massive weight of regulation. I noticed that the sandbox, the objective was stated as being how to regulate it. That's not the objective. Nobody mentioned proportionality or cost benefit. And, doesn't that matter a great deal? We've got patients dying, we've got patients ill, and we're hanging around not doing things because it takes too long and it costs too much. Isn't it about time we had proportionality written out nicely?
Yeah, I mean, I can say specifically to the HTA system and my presentation, the reality is that it doesn't work today. It doesn't work. So there is an argument to be made about proportionality even today or yesterday in the system of 27 different systems. So for me, it's a step in the right direction. And it's less, or proportionality for me in that system is more political will than anything else. I think what we observe is that there's not that much political will yet from the 27 different healthcare systems to make the particular JCA system work. And then, to have a bit of a moment of honest clarity this morning, it's also because the way you assess a medicine has implications on how you price it. So that is indeed a prerogative that member states are extremely reluctant to part with. So, and then you come into the broader philosophical questions of who makes the decision and what is the ultimate objective. Is it to accelerate and facilitate patient access, or is it to protect healthcare budgets? So that's where proportionality and political will in the end clash, if you will, or that's where the rubber hits the road.
Okay, we have one last question. I'm conscious of time.
Okay, thank you. Brian Search from Revogenics. Radu, you said two things about phages that make them different. They don't work on every strain and you get resistance. That sounds like a small molecule to me. But to build on that, I think what we're really talking about is in the small molecule space, if I have 1,000 molecular weight structure drug and I add a single methyl group to it, I have to go back to the beginning and assume everything. We know nothing about this molecule. Who knows what will happen, right? Everything from commercial validation, impurity, tox. What I think I'm really hearing with phages, we just want to be able to change the drug like this. And it just doesn't fit the framework. So in my mind, I'm thinking about what are other things in medicine. So if I want to get a nose job, I can go pay and get a nose job. And there's some basic things that doctor needs to do to be allowed to perform that procedure. He's got to use sterile instruments, he's got to use anesthesia, but ultimately he didn't have to run a random clinical trial to show that he could perform nose jobs. And maybe this is a medical procedure because none of this fits the medical framework. We want to break all the rules, but maybe this just isn't a medicine, it's something else.
Thanks, Ryan. Very interesting way of putting things. But frankly speaking, I mean, we need not forget that, our role, we are a technical body of the European Union that actually is there to make sure that patients that get whatever is administered to them, it has a positive benefit risk. We need not forget that. And frankly speaking, while I do acknowledge that there are limitations, and I wasn't able to answer to the previous question, but I'm happy to address this together. I believe that my sense is that we should stay positive, that this is a step forward that we need. Whether the ultimate scope is or is not to regulate the product may vary depending, I suppose, on where you're looking from. We are the regulators, so for us it's important to know how to regulate the product, and also, to make sure that our mandate that is being respected. I do appreciate that, seeing it from a different perspective, like with any other thing, I suppose, is hinting to things like, pricing and all these kind of things, to which myself, for instance, as a clinician, I have little expertise in too, but you heard that there are things going on with health technology bodies work together to trying to handle this as best as possible. There are also limitations that Mihai had alluded to, and maybe some others as well. But what I think should be the take-home message is that we as a union, as the European Union, we are reacting to the problems, and, we are trying to deal with them in a meaningful way. We need not forget this, and I think you will be, of course, all by, developing drugs coming to us, discussing, having scientific advices, you will build also for us knowledge as to how to best handle these things. So I would really invite you to come, but also I would send this positive message that, we are in the front of a new start, and I think it's something that hopefully will do good to society and to the patients. Thank you.
Mihai,
I think, Kerry, just to add, because I think context is everything. It's very important also for everything at every step of the way to also have the bigger picture and the context. Because, for example, nobody's arguing that we should be doing a randomized clinical control trial to check that parachutes work. So it's really, there are sometimes obvious situations where an RTC is not the way to go. But this is where context means everything. So rather than just focusing narrowly on what let's say the procedure says.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Jesus, we didn't get any questions. We're slightly over time. I do appreciate everyone's fantastic presentations today. I think it was a really informative. I didn't get to ask my question about most favoured nations, but I'll pick this up to you. Everyone's here. Jesus is obviously remote, but Mihai and Radu are going to be here for the day. If anybody wants to ask some questions, we can do that over a coffee. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. It's a good session. Thank you.